It is the 1st of April today. Exactly 89 years ago, on the 1st of April 1933, just months after Hitler rose to power, Nazi Germany enforced a 1 day economic boycott of Jewish run shops and establishments. It was the first state sponsored measure of Jewish persecution. I'm Smitha Nair. This is your weekly fix. What we're discussing here today in India started to take a more concerted form in the early days of the pandemic. Calls to boycott Muslim run and Muslim owned shops and establishments gathered traction online. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, real life manifestations of that call in the form of the misinformation campaign against ID Fresh Foods, the attacks on working class Muslims, like the Indore Bangle seller, or the Mathura dosha stall owner, or the attacks on Muslim vegetable and fruit vendors were seen. In fact, the latest in this sort of maliciously constructed narrative against Muslims is that of Raidi jihad. रेडी इस शब्द से आप वाकिफ होंगे अगर आप नॉर्थ में हैं रेडी मीन्स पुश कार्ट the term Raidi Jihad was coined by some of these right wing characters who had begun this campaign against fruit sellers and vegetable sellers in Uttam Nagar of Delhi. The implication of that term being that Muslims have monopolized businesses run on push carts and other informal sector jobs. In fact, my colleagues who have the misfortune of, and of course, do a key job of tracking misinformation peddled by the right wing media ecosystem tell me that this group has made some rather fanciful claims of a parallel Muslim economy. Okay. Now it transpires that Muslim vendors, traders, and shops will be kept out of doing business during the Jatre season in Karnataka. Jatre refers to temple fairs and chariot festivals that are currently underway in different parts of the state. Hindutva groups have managed to coerce temple committees and local administrations to put such a ban in place. Now, you would say that these are perhaps, hardline groups who enjoy some sort of political patronage or some tacit support from the state who are just going about business. These are sporadic. But no, the Burmese government, in fact, has gone on the record to say that this is a legit claim being made by Hindutva groups. They refer to a particular law in place. We'll discuss that with Samar in just a short bit. In fact, with us is Samar Halankar. He is, of course, a senior journalist. Many of you are familiar with his work. He's the founder of Article 14. Article 14 is an independent journalism platform. Also with us, Dr. Niranjan Sahu. He is senior fellow in the Governance and Politics Initiative at the Observer Research Foundation. Thanks so much to the two of you for making time. Samar, I'm going to take a bit of time with Dr. Sahu, a couple of minutes first to something that has really bothered me, Dr. Sahu, is I've been looking through some online commentary and I get the impression that there are many takers for this narrative that is being built that Muslims have cornered, certain kinds of jobs at the cost of Hindus. And also this sort of very sinister sounding parallel Muslim economy. I really don't know what they're referring to here. Now, the 2006 Sachar Committee report that looked into the social, economic, and educational condition of Muslims in India placed Muslims below scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in terms of backwardness. Share of Muslims in the echelons of power, IAS, IPS was and continued to be abysmal. Dr. Sahu, can you tell us what does the data tell us about the economic condition of Muslims and particularly the status of Muslims in the informal economy? Also, if you could reflect on how you view this sort of insidious campaign that is underway, against working class Muslims in particular.
Thank you, Smita. I think this is a very timely discussion. With regard to the status of Muslims, particularly in the economic sphere and, of course, in the larger political sphere, I see actually, Sachar committee in 2006 was a starting point in terms of, getting a lot of data. And of course, a lot of data is very anecdotal, they were not really empirical data. If you look at, in fact, the empirical data, which if you just go to some of the data points like the MPC, that monthly per capita consumption expenditure, or labor force participation, data, you in fact find far more starker, far more sharper kind of, very, very acute kind of, I would say, marginalization in terms of formal economy and informal economy. Because informal economy, I mean, those who argue that, Muslims are actually greatly present in informal economy, street vendors, you look at the stalls or the AC service wala, you name any kind of, random jobs, but these are actually largely low paid jobs. So if they are actually overcrowding in those kind of, informal jobs, which means, their economic situation is precarious. So that's number one. Number two, I would say, if you go by the data, starting with Sachar committee, and later on we got data from, lot of other government sources as well. Look at the formal, sector jobs, and some of the elite jobs like, IAS, IPS, and, those jobs which are decision making jobs that matters a lot, including the judicial, police service. The Muslims, if you look at the population, almost like 13 to 14%, the population ratio. And if you look at the police force, it doesn't actually go more than 4%. IS, in fact, just about 3%, and it is in fact in decline over last. I mean, starting with the Sachar committee, if you look at, we have passed more than 15, 16 years since the Sachar committee was, submitted, and, UPA government took several steps actually. I think on the ground there has been no any visible change, other than, issuing some kind of, scholarship, and, a few access to credit, and few other, area which was started by the UPA. So I see the situation is very, very dismal, and this is also linked to, they are also low education, literacy level. If you look at literacy level, in fact, they are actually worse placed than the SE, the scheduled caste. 68%, by 2011, if you look at, only 68% Muslims are actually, compared to 77%, national average. So that also gives a kind of stark reality where, socially, economically, educationally, they are actually placed today at the lowest of the lowest rung in Indian society. And that's about data. And those who talk about, that they are overcrowding or they are dominating the informal sector, they simply cannot figure out actually, that speaks, the precariousness about the situation. Because informal economy, you don't have social protection, and in a situation like, pandemic for 2 years, millions of them have actually lost their jobs, and they have no source to back off. So in a sense, you can easily understand the precarious situation of the Muslims today.
Right. And of course, somewhere in all this, we keep forgetting that we're talking about Indians. When these Muslims are Indian citizens, we're talking about. These are not immigrants who have come in and are, as these sort of right wing groups seem to claim, cornering jobs at the cost of Hindus. Summer, if you could sort of lead us into what has been happening in Karnataka in the last several months. We do know that Karnataka goes to the polls not too far from now, and many of them are, many of us are sort of political commentators, so social commentators are looking at developments in Karnataka from that sort of perspective, that, chunav aa rahe hain, which is why this is happening. Could you tell us, could you talk to us a little bit about the kind of employment or business opportunities that this festival season provides for many, like those, who hold precarious jobs, as Dr. Sahu referred to? What is this demographic that is going to be affected by this absolute denial of livelihood? And also, if you could take us through the justification put forth by the law minister in the state assembly, saying that a certain law exists and rules under which don't allow for non-Hindus to own stalls or run businesses in these sort of, in the peripheries of these festivals.
Thank you, Smitha. Um, so first, that there are hundreds of temple fairs in Karnataka, and most of them date back centuries. And the ebb and tide of history in the state has ensured that these jatres, the temple fairs, while they are rooted in Hindu tradition, they have pulled in every community: Hindu, Muslim, Jain, Christian. And there are any number of examples of temples with all kinds of syncretic traditions across the state. Of course, they are good for local economies, and they would be important to economic recovery after COVID. But the denial of opportunities that we are seeing now goes well beyond economics, to my mind. It shreds the very fabric of Karnataka's society and its myriad syncretic traditions. That indeed, of course, is the aim of Hindu fundamentalist organizations. Um, I'll just talk to you briefly, for example, about one of the fairs that was uh, reported on a lot, around the Bappanadu temple, which attracts not just, there is an 800-year-old shrine on the coast in the town of Mulki, and it attracts not just Hindus but Muslim and Christian devotees. It's one of the most popular fairs there. Now the temple is officially called the Durga Parmeshwari temple. I think it was built in the 13th century by Bappa Bihari, a Muslim sailor and merchant whose boat ran aground in the middle of the local Shambhavi River. And he is said to have had a vision in which Durga instructed him to build an abode for her. And the king, then, who was a Jain, provided land for the temple. And for 8 centuries now, people of all faiths have flocked to that temple, offering jasmine to the goddess. And the prasad, the devotional food offering, is delivered every year to Bihari's descendants to this day. The temple priests themselves take it and give it to them. So that's how strong many of these traditions are. And as I said, this is in many places across Karnataka, not just there. Now, to your second point about what the government and the law minister says, the 2002 law that they refer to, as far as that law goes, the government has clearly misinterpreted it. And this is quite clearly deliberate because no one can believe that the government does not have access to competent lawyers. It only needs a simple reading of this law to know that the law talks about leases in and around temple areas. There are no long term leases involved in these temple fairs. There are only temporary licenses for maybe 100 rupees, 500 rupees to 1000 rupees for the duration of the fairs. That apart from this, so there's very clearly a misinterpretation and it's deliberate, as I said. Then there is a larger question of constitutionality. The approval by the government of this intimidation by Hindu groups directly violates the constitution that the government is supposed to protect and uphold. And let me just briefly take you through that. Article 1 says the state shall not discriminate against any citizen on grounds only of religion, caste, race, sex, place of birth, or whatever. Article 15.2 elaborates that point and says it forbids any disability, liability, restriction, or condition with regard to access to shops, restaurants, hotels, and more. It's very clear that the government has failed to uphold either the law or the constitution.
Right. This is, I mean, I don't know how to say it better than it confounds me. We always thought, there's a certain Rubicon you will not cross as politicians in a state. Here, not even an attempt is being made in Karnataka, to sort of calm fears among the Muslim community, or to try and explain why this is being done, or why the government is sort of legitimizing this economic marginalization of Muslims. Are you surprised, Samar, by that? I mean, sure, we've had like two legislators from the BJP perhaps talk about how this is unconscionable and cannot go on. But beyond that, I was surprised that even an attempt wasn't made to try and sort of calm fears.
No, you're right there. The government hasn't calmed fears or attempted to because it is pandering to Hindu fundamentalist demands because they are electorally expedient. With assembly elections, as you said earlier, next year in a state where the opposition to the BJP is far from marginal or wiped out. And that's important to note. So I believe that the party has seized on these issues one after the other to make Hindus believe that they're under siege. First, there was the hounding of Christian pastors and places of worship. That was allowed by the government. The police stepped aside, creating an atmosphere that allowed the easy passage of an anti conversion law. Then came the hijab order out of the blue, which was confirmed then by the High Court. That confirmation and the government's obvious support to it has emboldened Hindu groups to start this campaign to ban Muslims from temple fairs. Now, in very quick order, now the demand for a ban on halal meat has been made. Made indeed, not by a Hindutva group, but they have, of course, made it and are now going shop to shop trying to ask for this. But that demand originally was made by a BJP National General Secretary and immediately latched on to and propagated by Hindutva groups. So all these events are manufactured either by the government or groups aligned with it and then aided and abetted by the government. In each case, the police and local administration take the cue from the government stand or the BJP stand, and we have seen they simply stand aside.
I want to ask you about this. There's a weird question that's come in on the subject of halal, but I'll take it up a little ahead, Samar. I want to ask this question to Dr. Sahu on because Dr. Sahu, you've written about this, this thing of civic dialogue that has always existed in India. We're talking about locally what happens. Now, the playbook, and I'm not referring to Karnataka here, but largely what we've seen across the country, the playbook has been to sort of weaponize an existing, very innocuous sort of issue. For example, a garden variety civic dispute, if I may, that existed in Uttam Nagar of Delhi. It appears that there was some kind of resentment against encroachment by street vendors into that area, traffic jams were caused, etc. Somehow, in a matter of days, there was a communal color given to it, and remarkably, a campaign to oust these people who earn their livelihood, primarily or predominantly Muslim vendors, sort of took shape. Now, my question to you is, how are people buying into this propaganda so easily, and what has happened to this concept of civic dialogue?
That's quite a complex question. I mean, India being very plural, diverse country. I mean, it's just not about religion. Look at even within the Hindu faith itself. It's such a richly diverse country in terms of caste, class, and within the faith also you have so many kind of diversity, and that always used to play a role in terms of what you called coming down, bringing down, those sort of, radical elements, who to weaponize the religion for their, we have seen this, for last more than 100 years. And that's the precise reason why most of the Hindu rights actually stayed in the fringe. Actually, they were never mainstream until, the politics actually brought them to the mainstream, starting with the Ram Janmabhoomi, movement. So that broader context one has to understand. So there is a politics, that politics that is actually pushing this, sort of, I would say, polarized kind of agenda, in which you are witnessing a kind of binary, in terms of this is what we versus them, and the otherization of a particular community, which rightly fits into the partition, sort of propaganda, and what stays in our historical memory. So that actually fits with the larger narrative. But the third thing, I think, what is happening is today, is actually what Samar said about that intention to win elections. This political short-termism, what we call in political science, actually is at the is the key elements on which many of these groups are also being used in a sense. It's not that these groups are actually dominating, and they are actually doing the agenda setting for the political party. It's other way. The political party is using these fringe groups for its own benefits. Look at the Karnataka case. It's classic case. What he said, that hijab thing was, came from rabbit's hat, actually from nowhere. I mean, that state, which is a fantastic example of syncretism and sort of peaceful coexistence for decades, was all of a sudden, because you are also sensing that assembly election is near the corner. So in a sense, what you also witness in UP, about that attack on the dosa seller in Mathura, and many other issues related to beef ban or conversion or cow, many of those things are actually, in many way, I would say, the political entrepreneurs are using it, this religion card, the Hindutva card, for largely maximizing it. And I don't think this is going to continue forever, but once in a while, when there is a need, I would say it's expediency of electoral politics largely.
Samar, what is and this has been discussed ad nauseum now, the role of media bin? Can you, I'm sure, I mean, this is something that you track as well. What is the role of media bin, particularly with respect to this sort of call of economic boycott of Muslims? Not just mainstream, but the other uh, sort of right wing media ecosystem that exists, on using big tech, etc. How do you see that? Samar, I think you've muted yourself. Can you?
I think it's very important to, as you said, distinguish among the kinds of media ecosystems that exist in India. One, of course, is the normal mainstream media that exists. There is a right-wing ecosystem, very clearly aligned with the government and aligned with Hindutva concerns, and there is the independent, what is left of the independent media. That, unfortunately, is the smallest and the least influential of the media in India. The right wing ecosystem, we know where they stand, and they have steadily grown in their viciousness and in their willingness to spread fake news and to spread any kind of news that might further vitiate matters and cleave society even more than it is divided now. Uh, I think the biggest responsibility falls on the mainstream media, the media houses with deep pockets, the one who have money, who have influence, everything. They have become, in my mind, and I hate to say this because I've been a part of the mainstream media for nearly more than 25 quarter of a century. They have become enablers because they have consciously stayed away from controversial issues, and these are all controversial issues. They have stayed away from these issues. They do not report these issues as much as they should. They do not call out the government and its ecosystem when they should, at best. And at worst, they have gradually moved towards directly being involved in the propagation of these issues and becoming government mouthpieces.
Yeah, and Dr. Sahu, what about the sort of equivocation on the part of the opposition parties? We are yet to see. I mean, we've heard a little bit from JDS leaders. I heard Mr. Revanna say something yesterday, but we haven't heard, not just in with respect to what's happening in Karnataka, but elsewhere too. We have hardly heard an opposition leader come out and speak with clarity and sort of condemn with clarity this call for exclusion and an economic marginalization of the Muslim community.
That's a very sort of I would say it's that question actually hits the heart of our entire conversation. I think the ruling party and its many of its sister organizations are able to monopolize and completely run the show, the so-called Hindutva agenda, and that narrative they have built over decades is largely because of absence of a coherent kind of opposition. I would say to not only in terms of politics, also in terms of ideas. That ideas of inclusive India or the secular India, which was pushed by propagated by Congress and nurtured for decades, today actually is under heavy attack. But then you don't have actually tall Congress leader who can really counter it. That is one. Second issue, what is happening very unfortunately is that just because this narrative is paying the ruling party politically and they are able to win election by polarizing, so most of your mainstream opposition parties are actually falling in the line in terms of it's becoming a competitive Hindutva. They are actually using the softer version of Hindutva. And if you look at starting with Rahul Gandhi and many of the regional leaders, each one of them make a beeline to whether it's a Hindu temple or going to some sort of religious or seers or whoever. So I think that's the biggest tragedy, that a kind of polarizing and the kind of discriminatory sort of ideology being promoted against a particular community is instead of being countered and decisively told to the people that they should not fall for those kind of propaganda. It is actually most of these leaders are actually competing for their own political space, and that's where actually we see that even fringe groups have a complete sort of easy go to do whatever they like. And unfortunate fact also is about the institution, the democratic institution today, starting with the judiciary and many of the other institutions, including even media, are actually silent spectator, and their actually silence is actually helping this sort of idea to flourish.
But Samar, not every state is Uttar Pradesh. And the point that you made earlier, that Karnataka doesn't have an absent opposition. There is still. It's not that the opposition is marginal in Karnataka. There is a robust sort of existing political structure for the opposition parties in the state, including the Congress party. Are we and the JDS? Are we expecting to see something different in the months ahead as we go into sort of election year? In terms of how they deal with these issues, including the current one of sort of open calls for economic marginalization of Muslims. Are you expecting to see something different?
I don't know, frankly, how they're going to deal with it. But one thing has been clear: both the JDS and the Congress have been very explicit in criticizing and condemning these boycotts. The leaders have very openly and very clearly said these should not be allowed to stand, that the government must step in and stop this. This has been very clear and very explicit. And I think they're going to take this into the electoral campaign as well, except that they may not explicitly say this, I suppose, given as what Dr. Sahu referred to as the whole question of soft Hindutva, where they feel compelled not to broach these topics. But as of now, with all this unfolding around us, and society and Karnataka society sliding even further into the abyss, they have clearly done what they can by speaking out. Of course, they can do much more. They need to be present on the ground. And when these campaigns go on, when these campaigners, Hindutva campaigners, go out, and as they are right now trying to shut shops down and distributing pamphlets calling for economic boycotts of halal meat, is the latest atrocity. All these can be combated and should be combated. And I believe in Karnataka at least, there is a large enough constituency of people who think that this is really quite horrific of what's going on, and it can be retrieved. But it is up to the opposition parties to do much more going into the election season.
Right. That's heartening. Summer, you referred to this, and we got many iterations of the same sort of comment when I put up a tweet, and I got some emails as well. Now, one of them, Yatin Atri, wrote to me saying, "What is halal after all? It's a product certified by Muslim organizations that have been procured, processed by Muslims according to the Sunnah. If this can be openly done, which the right wing refers to as economic boycott of a kind by Muslims, why does it matter?" Or why is it objectionable if we call for a boycott of halal goods? Now, this is this is obviously not the first time that the matter has come up. This has happened in my state in Kerala as well, if you remember, in 2020,
Yeah.
and it has sort of sporadically been taken up. But if you can sort of answer Yatin's question.
There's little logic to questions like these. I just find it hard to even try to address these kind of questions. Halal meat has never offended anyone before, has it? So why does it suddenly now? There is among Hindu extremists, and let me say only among Hindu fundamentalists, this attempt to draw false equivalence with jhatka meat, which most of us knew very little about. And while there may be a few no meat-eating Hindu I know cares if the meat is halal or not. And by the way, meat shop owners, certainly around here, around my house itself, will tell you that they prefer halal meat because it stays fresh longer since it has been drained of blood. But forget all that. This is a pointless non-issue that is obviously being raked up. And that question, I saw that question, in fact, even before you had sent it to me. It talks about the threat to secularism. As for the threat to secularism, this is just bizarre. I don't see how it threatens. I don't see the threat when Hindu religious practices are thrust on people of every religion in public spheres, offices, and functions across this country. People of other religions do not object to any of this. And none of this is clearly a threat to secularism. Neither is halal meat. What is a threat to secularism, in my mind, is the fake and entirely hateful campaign to ban it.
Right. I'm being told by the producer that we're sort of running out of time. I want to close by seriously looking at, because this has just not been spoken about enough. The Sachar Committee recommendations remain unimplemented. This is what we sort of began this conversation by referring to. Dr. Sahu, one of the key recommendations made by the committee was to set up an equal opportunities commission. And Justice Sachar very clearly said that there needs to be a legal recourse, where communities such as minorities like Muslims can deal with sort of active discrimination in employment, in housing, etc. And this has been documented. This is well documented, the discrimination that exists. The outgoing UPA 2 cabinet had cleared the setting up of such a commission in February of 2014. Nothing has sort of come of it. I mean, what can we expect on that? Should opposition run state governments find a way, to sort of lead the path and look to form some sort of an equal opportunities commission in their states? And what about the National Commission of for Minorities? A word on what is a statutory body? We've heard nothing from the National Commission for Minorities thus far of consequence on this sort of insidious campaign. As I said, it's been slow and ongoing, at least since the beginning of the pandemic.
These are, I think, a very valid point on that Equal Opportunity Commission, which was basically recommended by the Sachar Committee. that India should follow basically the Western model. In many Western countries, starting with the United States and in Europe and even in a lot of those countries in Asia and Latin America, especially where you have substantial minorities and there are issues of racial discriminations, you need a actually equal opportunity commission so that they can look at any kind of a complaint or grievances. Today, for instance, we have number of studies in the recent times that are brought out in the private sector jobs, especially where Muslims and scheduled caste actually face discriminations, and they have been in a lot of cases they are, based on their identity, they have been kept out from the selection process. So those kind of things actually would have been taken care of by the by this sort of commission, because that will be a constitutional body. It will have actually power, unlike the minority commission and many other half a dozen body we have, which are basically toothless bodies and have no kind of power actually to take actions, punitive actions. That's one. Second issue, I think state, what you referred to, I think in a federal country, I think most of the actions will be happening at the state level. I think that's where I think we should be looking at. I think some of the states, including opposition ruled states, let's forget about the BJP or right wing, ruled states. What's happening at the many opposition ruled states, including Congress? Why can't these states actually take up or appoint equal opportunity commission and look at some of those issues of discrimination and sort of marginalizations, and take some kind of steps actually immediately to and the most important thing is about education. Education is where actually will bring a lot of these Muslims or scheduled caste or scheduled tribe actually to the mainstream, to the formal sector of jobs, by skilling them, by providing them exposure and opportunities. And that's where actually there is no conversation happening, unfortunately.
Right. Okay. Dr. Sahu, there's, of course, the Sachar committee report is something that will require another show to sort of entirely discuss. I appreciate your views, though, Dr. Sahu, and to sort of take forward the point that Samar was making about the fact that independent media is sort of negligible in both scope and influence at the moment, but at least they're doing their bit like we are at Scroll. So if you appreciate the reporting that we're doing, there's a scroll down at the bottom of your screens. You can go to scroll.in/contribute and find out how you can help us report. Somebody said a point you wanted to make?
Yes,
Quickly.
very quickly. I want to make a point that we have not touched on at all. We've looked at everything around the periphery. We have not looked at the main point. And all these boycotts, they do not just further the radicalization of Hindu society, but they indeed reflect a growing radicalization that we're seeing. And that is something we don't talk about enough of this country. Let us understand that none of these campaigns would get the traction that they have if there wasn't a receptive audience. So whether these campaigns gain ground is entirely up to India's majority community, the Hindus. And I'm afraid at this point, there is little sign of a serious pushback among Hindus or our willingness to accept the rule of law, the concept of togetherness, and that we're all Indians with equal rights. In short, things don't look very good if you're looking at the Hindu community from the outside.
I think that answers my question about what happened to civic dialogue, something that we saw happening, when such sort of conflagrations happened in the past. Samar, thanks very much for joining us here on Scroll. Dr. Sahu as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.